What's going on, guys? So in this video, I'm going to show you guys how we can deploy a React application to an AWS S3 bucket. And on top of that, I'm going to show you how we can utilize AWS Certificate Manager to generate an SSL certificate so that we can handle secure traffic to our web application. And I'm going to show you guys how we can distribute our application using AWS Cloudfront as a CDN. Now for this video, we need a React application that we can use for actually deploying to AWS. And so I have this public GitHub repo that you guys can take a look at that has a simple React application that we can use as a demo for the whole deployment process. And it's a simple cryptocurrency price tracker. And I actually made a separate video on how we actually created this application. So if you want to learn how to do that, I have a separate video for that. But keep in mind, you don't really need to know the inner workings of how this application works. We just need to use it as a demo app. You can technically use any application if you want to follow along. It can be any apps that you've made. It can also even just be the default starter app that comes when you use Create React App as well. But the reason I picked this application is because it uses React Router. And I found that when deploying to AWS S3, there are some challenges when it comes to client-side routing. So I wanted to make sure that I used a demo app with React Router so that I can show you some of the challenges that we'll face and how we can navigate around them when it comes to deploying to AWS S3. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the URL for this GitHub repo, and I'm going to just open this up, and I'm going to clone this repo. All right, so we've got all of our source code here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to do an npm run build. So when you're deploying a React app, you run the npm run build, which is a script within your package.json file. So if we do a build, it's going to actually create our final code. And looks like, did we run into an issue? And I realized I forgot to do an npm install first. So let's do an npm install. Let's give that a few seconds to run. And then after that, we can do an npm run build. All right, so that's finished. So now let's do an npm run build. That's going to create all of our static assets. All right, so it looks like it's finished, and you can see that now we have our build folder, and this is going to have all of our final source code ready to be deployed. And so you'll see our index.html file, and then within our static folder, you'll have all of our CSS and JavaScript files as well. All right, so now let's go ahead and log into the AWS console and get started on creating our S3 bucket. So in the AWS console, you can either go ahead and select the S3 button right here if you've already been there before. But if you don't have that, just go ahead and search for S3, and it should be the first search result. So this will take us to the S3 window. And here I'm going to select Create Bucket. And we need to give this bucket a name. It can be any name that you want, but keep in mind this name is global. So if I create a bucket named Sanjeev, you cannot create a bucket named Sanjeev. So this one, once again, is global. So you have to select a unique name. I'm going to select Create React Deploy, and I'm going to hope that no one else in the world has taken this name before. And then we have to select a region that we want to run this in. And you could select any region. I'm on the East Coast, so that's why it defaults to Northern Virginia. But you could select any other region you want. So I'm just going to select Ohio just to show you it doesn't matter. And because this bucket is used as a web server, we're going to ultimately configure it to run as a web server. So anyone in the world can access our website. We want to make sure that we don't block public access. And so we want to make sure it's open to the public. And AWS makes you acknowledge that you're opening this up to the public. So just go ahead and select that. Versioning doesn't matter. You can give it an optional tag as well. None of the other settings matter. Let's go ahead and create that bucket. So now that we have our bucket, let's select Create React Deploy Bucket that we just created. And the first thing I want to do is let's copy our source code into our bucket. So let me open this up in my folder. Give me a second to bring that up. And so you can see here that I have all of my files here. And so we want to go into the build folder and we want to grab all of these files. And before we do that, let's go ahead and select the upload button. And then what we want to do is just take these files and just drag them right in. So I'm going to take this and then we're just going to drag it right in. And so we can see all the files that are going to get copied over. Go ahead and select upload. And then it's going to upload those files one by one. Right, now that we have those files, go to this section, go back to buckets, go back to our create react deploy bucket, and you can see all of our files are in there. And let's go into properties real quick. And let's just make sure that everything looks good here. None of these sections really matter. However, down here, there's this static website hosting. And we want to make sure we enable website hosting because that's the whole reason we're configuring this. So let's select edit right here. And we want to enable static website hosting. And then we have to select an index document. So this is basically, when the user navigates to the URL of this bucket, what file do we give them? Well, if we go back to our folder, right, we want to give them our index.html file. So we're just going to type in index.html. This error document, don't worry about that for now. We're going to come back to that, that's for sure. Let's save these changes. And then let's go to permissions. Now you can see here the section where we are allowing all public access. It's just giving you a warning, but remember we're making a static website, so that's perfectly okay. We need to give this a bucket policy. So this is a policy on who can do whatever with the various files on here. And what you want to do is I have this page open right here, and this is in the AWS docs. And under the simple storage document, there's this hosting a static website. And then there's a section called setting permissions for website access. And you can see it gives you a default policy right here. So you could just copy this. So I'm just going to copy that directly. We're going to go back in here and we're just going to paste it. Well, let's make sure we select edit. And right here, you want to make sure that you update the bucket name. So instead of just bucket-name, we want to put in the bucket name that I created. So mine's called create react deploy. I'm going to do create react deploy. And basically all we're saying is that we can send GET requests to this bucket, which is all a user should be doing, right? They shouldn't be sending a post request to our website. They should just be sending a GET request so they can get that index.html file. And so that's all this policy is really doing. But you don't really need to worry about anything else in here. This is all just kind of a default configuration. Just copy it directly from this website and you should be good to go. Let's save these changes. And so we've got our permission set. Nothing else really matters here. And then finally, let's go back to our property section. And after we enabled static website hosting, you'll see that we have a URL. And so this is going to be the URL for our website. So let's select this. It's going to open up a new page. And you can see our React application. And so this is my demo application. It's a very simple app where it just shows you the different prices of the different cryptocurrencies. And we can add in more cryptocurrencies. So if I want Cardano, whatever that is, it's going to get added to the list. And then I can select on one of these. And you'll see it takes me to a different URL. It's going to take me to coins/Bitcoin. And so this is client-side routing right here where we go to a different page. And then this is just going to show you a nice little graph of the history of the price of that specific cryptocurrency. So we've got our application partially deployed. Obviously, there's still a few more things that we need to do. But before we tackle, creating a custom domain and handling SSL and things like that, I want to show you one issue with our deployment. Right? And so if you take a look at where we are right now, you can see that we're on this URL coin/Bitcoin, right? If we go back to the main page of our application, it's just at the root path of the URL. And then when I select this or any of our coins, it's going to take us to /coins and then the name of the Bitcoin. Sorry, the name of the cryptocurrency. And that's how I set up React Router to do the routing for my application. And everything works fine, right? As long as I start on this page, and it looks like it's a little slow. I'm not really sure what's going on right here. Let's just refresh that. All right, as long as I start on this page and then select a cryptocurrency, everything works. But what happens if I'm already on a specific crypto page and I hit refresh? Well, we get a 404. And I want you to think about exactly why that is, right? Why is it that if I start at the root path and then go to a cryptocurrency, it works. But if I start on this page and just go directly to it with a refresh, it breaks? Well, it's pretty simple, actually. So let's go back to the root URL. And so when we go to this URL, what's going to happen is that S3 has been configured based off of this section right here. If I hit edit, to send us to this index.html file. So we get to the index.html file, and at that point, React loads up the necessary components. And then when I select this button right here, React Router is going to then append this URL, and then it's going to load up the components associated with this page. So React Router is handling all of that. However, when we go directly to this page, right, when the user sends a GET request to our S3 bucket to this specific URL, right, what happens is that when we send that request to S3, S3 goes to our bucket and it looks for /coins/Bitcoin. So it looks for a folder called coins. And if you look at all of our objects that we uploaded, there is no folder called coins. There shouldn't be. And so that's why we get a 404, because that folder doesn't exist. And that file, Bitcoin, doesn't exist either. So it's going to give us a 404. So how exactly do we tackle this issue? Well, it's actually pretty simple. Let's go to the properties page and let's scroll all the way down to the static website hosting. And under this error document, right, usually what we would use this for is that we'll create a custom HTML file that handles what the user should see when they see an error. However, we're using React, and so we wouldn't necessarily do that. We want React to handle everything. So what we're going to do is, I'm going to say, send it back to index.html. And so what's going to happen is that when the user goes directly to /coin/Bitcoin, S3 is going to report an error. It's going to give a 404. However, instead of returning this 404 page, what it's going to do is it's just going to send back the index.html file to the user. So the index.html file is going to load up React. It's going to still have this exact URL, and then React Router will route and load up the necessary components for this specific URL. So let's save this. And now I'm going to hit refresh with this full URL. So if I hit refresh, we can see that it fixes that issue. So now we can go directly to a specific coins page. So now that we fixed the previous issue, the next thing I want to tackle is this part right here. See where it says not secure? This means that we're using HTTP and not HTTPS. And you never want to deploy a website that uses HTTP. You always want to use HTTPS because it's secure. You don't want anyone else to be able to see the traffic going between your end users and your website, because that's dangerous and all their personal information could get leaked in that case. So let's go ahead and configure SSL. Now, to configure SSL, there's a little bit of an issue. When you host a website on S3, you can't actually use SSL, right? And you're probably thinking, well, what is the point of doing all this? Well, we can still get SSL, but we have to use a different service within AWS. And that service is called Cloudfront. And if you don't know what Cloudfront is, it's a CDN. And for anyone that's using CDN or anyone that's used CDN before, you might be wondering, well, what does that have to do with SSL? Well, here's the thing. Cloudfront or a CDN has nothing to do with SSL. If you don't know what a CDN is, I actually have a picture for you guys to show you exactly what a CDN does. So normally, think of this as our web server or our S3 bucket in this case. Right? Normally, a user, regardless of where they are in the world, they could be in the United States, they can be in South America, Africa, or Australia. When they want to access our website, they have to send a request all the way to this server wherever it's located. And so for people in like Australia, people in Russia, right? That's a long distance that request has to go to actually receive that traffic. And so what a CDN does is it has these edge locations. We set up these little mini sites or these mini servers all around the world so that users in America can go to this edge location right here that's going to have all of our website files. So they can just access our website by going here. And the same thing goes for South America, right? The user could just send a request to their local site. And same thing with Australia, same thing with any other country, right? And so that's going to speed up, the response time for users so that they can get access to our website much quicker, and we don't overwhelm our servers by having everyone in the world talk to those servers. So by having these edge locations, we can really allow, the end users to have a much better experience using our application because they can just talk to a server that's geographically as close as possible to them. And so, like I said, this has nothing to do with SSL. But when you use AWS's CDN service, which is called Cloudfront, you get the ability to be able to use SSL on their CDN. So that's why we're ultimately going to use the CDN, because we get access to SSL, but we get an extra benefit is that we can now move our React application from our local S3 bucket to the edge nodes provided by AWS's Cloudfront service. So that's what we're going to do in this section now. All right, so now let's go back to the AWS console and let's set up our CDN. So let's search for CloudFront, which is AWS's CDN service, and select that. And what we want to do is we want to select Create Distribution. So let's hit Get Started. And the first thing that we have to do is we have to give it the origin domain name. So if you select this, you'll see that we can automatically select our S3 bucket, so the origin for it. However, you don't want to do this, right? Don't select the auto-filled your auto-filled S3 bucket. Instead, what I want you to do is I want you to go back to AWS S3. So I'm just going to cancel. Actually, let's just cancel out of this for now. And let's go back to S3 real quick. And let's go to our bucket, and then let's go under properties. And let's get that URL again. So we want to copy the URL. However, I don't actually want the full URL. I want to grab everything except for the http://. So I want everything from create all the way till the end. However, it looks like I can't actually highlight that much. Oh, there we go. So we'll select up to there. And then now let's go back to CloudFront. And let's create a distribution. We'll get started here. And then we just want to paste that. And remember, we don't want the HTTP section. So just starting from the name of your bucket. All right. And then let's scroll on down. And we'll leave everything default for now, right? I think everything else should be fine for now. And let's just hit Create Distribution. And you'll see that right now it says in progress. And this takes a couple of minutes, actually. It's not exactly the quickest process because what it's doing is it's taking all of our files from our S3 bucket and it's pushing it out to all of those edge nodes. So this takes a little while. So I'm going to pause this video for now, and then I'll touch base with you guys once that's complete. All right, so now that our CloudFront deployment is now in a deployed status, that means it's done. And so to actually take a look at that, instead of going to our S3 bucket URL, we now have a CloudFront URL. So when we go to this URL right here, this is going to take us to whatever edge node is geographically closest to us. So I'm going to paste this in here, and hopefully, if everything works, we should load up our React application. So if I select this, it looks like it's working. Let me refresh on this page, and it's working just fine. So we've now successfully deployed it to all of the edge nodes using CloudFront. So now we actually have to tackle two things. First of all, we want to use a custom domain name. So I don't want to have to use this goofy URL for my end users. And then we want to create certificates so that we don't get this ugly not secure sign in our web browser. So let's tackle that in the next section. So to set up a custom domain name, the first thing that we have to do is we have to purchase a domain name. So if you don't already have one, go ahead and purchase one, and you can use any domain registrar. I like to use Namecheap. That just happens to be the one that I use. And what I've done is I've purchased this sanjeev.xyz. You'll see that in a lot of my tutorial videos, I always just use this domain name. It was the cheapest one I could find. And so I want to reiterate that, if you're using a different domain registrar, you'll see that some of the steps are slightly different. And unfortunately, I can't show you guys how to, use a different domain registrar because I don't use it myself. So I'm going to show you guys how to use it in Namecheap. You'll see that the steps should be fairly identical regardless of what registrar you use. However, certain menus, certain locations of certain parameters are in different locations depending on what website you use, like GoDaddy or whatever else. So just keep that in mind, but I'm going to walk you through how we set up with Namecheap. You'll see that it's really simple. All I'm going to do is I'm going to actually point it to AWS's Route 53, which is their DNS management service. And so regardless of what domain registrar you use, it's fairly straightforward to actually just point it to AWS, and you'll see that there's plenty of documentation regardless of what website you use. So let's go to AWS, and we're going to go to Route 53. So this is their DNS service, and you can actually purchase a domain name from AWS, and that's going to simplify a lot of things. However, I wanted to show you guys how to set this up from a external domain registrar that wasn't already within AWS. So under the Route 53 dashboard, we want to create a hosted zone. And then here you just give your domain name. So, if I go back to Namecheap, my domain name is sanjeev.xyz. So we want to make this sanjeev.xyz. And if you guys want to purchase a domain name to kind of follow along, .coms are usually expensive. .xyz, very cheap. That's why I bought this. And then, we don't really care about a description. You want to select public hosted zone. You can give it a tag, but too lazy to do that. So I'm just going to hit select create hosted zone. And once you create that, you'll see a couple of entries here, a couple of DNS records. And we want to focus on this one that says NS as a type. And you'll see a couple of values right here. So all of these values we want to copy into Namecheap. So we want to say we want to tell Namecheap to redirect it to these values right here. So let's go to Namecheap. And under the DNS section, I want to select custom DNS. And then here you just paste the name servers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab all of these name servers, and that's what these are. So I'm just going to copy this one by one. And I'm going to paste it in here. I got those pasted in. I'm just going to hit that green check mark. All right. And, a lot of times you'll get this warning that says, a update to the DNS configs could take up to 48 hours. Theoretically, it could. You'll see that DNS tends to be a little bit slower in general. However, I usually see these updates propagate within a couple minutes. So, if you're following along, give it, 5-10 minutes just in case if things aren't working. But usually within 2 minutes or so, it's usually good to go. So now that we've got this set up on Namecheap, we're done with Namecheap. That's all we have to do. You just point it to these DNS servers, which are AWS's DNS servers, and you're done. So now let's go back to Route 53, and let's actually go back to our CloudFront. And let's select our specific distribution. We should only have one in this case. And I'm going to select Edit. And you'll see that right now it's using the default CloudFront certificate if the user ends up using HTTPS. So a couple of things I want to do. First of all, here, we're going to specify the domain names that we're going to use for our website. So it's going to be sanjeev.xyz. And we also want to service www.sanjeev.xyz so we can handle both of them. A couple of things that we need to do. So first of all, we want a custom SSL certificate because we're not going to use the default one. So here we're going to select request or import a certificate with the AWS certificate manager. So let's select this. And it should open up a new window. So this is where we tell AWS to create a certificate for our specific domain name, which in this case is sanjeev.xyz. And when you click this link, it should ideally move you to the Northern Virginia region. And this is important. So regardless of where your S3 bucket is deployed, you always want to create your certificates in Northern Virginia. This is a requirement. It's in the documentation. It tells you to do that. So it's okay if your bucket's in one location. The certificates have to be created in Northern Virginia if you want to use it in CloudFront. So here under Add Domain Names, we want to select our domain names. And so here in this case, we'll do sanjeev.xyz. And then we want to add one more to this certificate, which is going to be www.sanjeev.xyz. Let's hit next. And we have to validate the certificate for this. So we want to make sure, we need to tell AWS, look, we actually own this domain name, right? So there's two ways to do it. There's email validation and there's DNS validation. If you want to go through the email process, just select that and then I guess they send you an email and then you just click a link probably. However, I'm just going to use the DNS validation method. So I'm going to select next. And you can give it a tag, but we'll skip that. Just verify that everything looks good and then select confirm and request. And you'll see that it's going to say pending validation. So let's go down here. And I'm going to just hit that little drop down. And to actually validate this, what we want to do is select this create record in Route 53. And this is awesome because it's actually going to create the specific CNAME record that we need to actually validate that we, own this domain name. So you just select this and you select create. And then let's go to the www.sanjeev.xyz. and select create as well. And so if we actually go back to Route 53, you should see actually create two entries, a CNAME record with this value, with this name and this value, and a CNAME record for this name and this value. And you'll see that after a couple minutes, this pending validation will turn into like a success or validated, but it usually takes a little while. So let's go back to Route 53. I just want to show you the entries that AWS automatically created for us. And if it didn't have that button for us, we would just have to manually do it. But I just wanted to make sure I highlight exactly what's happening behind the scenes. So we have our hosted zone. And you'll notice that we have 4 records now, right? Before we just had these 2 records at the top. But here we've got those 2 new records, right? It automatically added those records for us. And that's all we had to do, right? So you could manually do it yourself, or you could just click that button and it'll do it for you. So that's, and you know, AWS really likes to make things simple for you. So let's go back to CloudFront. Sorry, not CloudFront. We want to go back to our certificate manager. And you'll see that looks like Sanjeev.xyz is already successful and it's successfully validated. However, we're still waiting for www.sanjeev.xyz. So let's give that a few more minutes and then I'll circle back with you guys and then we can start tackling the next section. All right, so it looks like it's successfully validated the certificate for both domain names. So let's just quickly go back to our application. We haven't actually set it up to handle using our custom domain yet. But you'll see that if we go to the CloudFront URL, not the S3 bucket, you'll see that we get the not secure. And that's just because we're using HTTP. But we do have the built-in certificate if we use the CloudFront distribution URL. So I could type in HTTPS : / and you'll see we get the little lock sign. So we do have a certificate. So if you do want to just use this URL, it's going to work with SSL just fine. So if you're just creating a fun little demo project app and you want to use this URL, you don't want a custom domain, it's going to work fine. You didn't need to create this certificate manager or anything like that. However, we are going to use a custom URL, and so that's why we had to do all of this work. But I don't like the fact that I have to manually type in HTTPS in this folder, in the URL. So I want to set up automatic redirection. So if I go back to my distribution and select behaviors, and then select the one that we have and select edit, we should have a redirection option. So redirect HTTP to HTTPS. So if I hit yes, edit. Now, if I go back to this website and I remove the S, right, and just do HTTP, notice we still get the lock. That's because it redirected to HTTPS. And I don't know what happened to my application. It's not loading for some reason. There we go. Something's wrong right there. But we got the redirection working. Now what I want to do is let's go back to select this ID, select edit under general, and let's set up our certificate. So right now, SSL is working because we have the default CloudFront certificate. And what I want to do is I want to use the custom ones that we created. So select this. And it looks like it's not letting me use the custom SSL certificate. And that's because I got to add my domain name. So sanjeev.xyz and www.sanjeev.xyz. And we want to make sure that these match with what we set up in the certificate. And it's not showing up there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit refresh. Sometimes it doesn't show up. So I'm going to go back here, do this again. So now you can see that it's no longer grayed out. So it seems to be a little bit of a bug in the UI of AWS, but it's not really a big deal. Just make sure to hit refresh. All right, so we got that custom SSL certificate. And you'll see that we can automatically pull in the one we created. And then here you have the option of using what version of TLS. Just use the recommended version, HTTP/2. Everything else is good. Distribution state set to enabled. Hit yes, edit. And then let's go back to CloudFront distribution. And because we made those changes, you'll see that it's going to have to push those changes out. So let's give this, it's going to take about another 5 minutes or so. So I'm going to pause this video once again. And then once it's finished, we'll then take a look and see if our custom domain actually works now. All right, so now our changes have been deployed and it's time to actually test this out now. So let's go here and let's search. Actually, let me just open up a new tab and I'm going to go to sanjeev.xyz. All right, so here I'm going to hit enter and let's see what happens. And it looks like when I go to our custom domain name, things fail. So why is it failing? I thought we set up the certificate. Well, we did set up the certificate. However, we haven't handled the domain records for that, right? So there's nothing telling, any of the web servers out there to route traffic for Sanjeev.xyz to our Cloudfront distribution. So how do we actually do that? Well, we have to go to AWS because remember, Namescheap is sending everything to AWS Route 53. So we have to tell Route 53 to forward requests for Sanjeev.xyz towards our Cloudfront distribution. So let's go back to Route 53. And we're going to have to put in an A record. So let's go to our hosted zone and select our specific zone. And I'm going to create a new record. And we'll select simple routing. And we're just going to define a simple record. And so for the record name, you can just leave this blank because we're not going to use a specific subdomain. So this is going to handle routing for all subdomains. And then here we want to select an A record, which is the default. And then we want to select an endpoint. And so here, what we're going to do is an alias to a Cloudfront distribution. And then we want to select our distribution. So it's going to automatically pull up all your distributions. I just got one, so I'm going to select that. And I'm going to create that record and create. All right, so we now have that extra record right here at the top. And so that should fix things. So let's try. It's going to take a few seconds to obviously propagate, but let's see if it's how quick it is. And it looks like it's still failing. So let's give it another minute or so. And hopefully that should get things up and running. All right, and it looks like the change is propagated. So now when I go to Sanjeev.xyz, everything is working just fine. So let's test everything out. So I'm going to go to Bitcoin, working perfectly. And while I'm already on the Bitcoin page, let's hit refresh and see if it works. And it does. So it looks like we got everything working. There's one last thing that I want to do. So if we go back to our Cloudfront distribution, just for handling errors, I do want to make one slight change. If we go to error pages, we want to create a custom error response. So let's select that for HTTP error code. We can just select, like a 403 or a 404. And then here, just to make sure if we have any kind of errors, we want to always send the user back to index.html. So we do /index.html so that we can handle all the error and the routing within our React application. And then we'll send the HTTP response code to be a 200 OK. So we'll hit create. It shouldn't break our application or anything like that. Let's go back to general. Everything's good. And let's go back. And it looks like we have to wait for the deployment. So let's wait for this to deploy one more time. And then once that's done, we'll double check and let's make sure that, it didn't break in our application. And then at that point, you guys have a fully deployed React application within AWS S3 bucket and CloudFront as well. All right, so those changes have been deployed. Let's go to our application again and let's test it out just to make sure we didn't break anything. I'm just going to go back to the root path. And actually, I want to go back to Sanjeev.xyz. Let's hit refresh. Things are good. Let's go to click on one of the coins. And then here, let's hit refresh. And everything is working fine. So we've got our application successfully deployed. At this point, you can stop the video. However, I want to show you guys how we make changes to our application. So, when we change the source code, how do we push this out to our S3 bucket and to our CloudFront distribution as well? So we're going to tackle that in the next section. Okay, guys, so what we're going to do now is we're going to make a small change to our application. And then we're going to try to push those changes out just to kind of show you what exactly needs to be done so that we can actually push these changes out to our AWS environment. And so if you take a look at it here, at the top, we have the name of our application called Coinstar. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just change that and I'm going to add a couple of exclamation points just to make a minor irrelevant UI change. So in our code, if you go to our source folder, under components, we have our header component. And so that's where it says Coinstar. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a couple of exclamation points. That's it. It's a very simple change. But it doesn't really matter what you're changing in your application. At the end of the day, we want to make some changes and we want to push it out. So let's save that. And I'm going to do an npm run build. So that's going to build all of our static assets once again. All right, that's complete. So we've got our new static assets. And we now have to get this over to our S3 bucket. So let's go back to AWS console. And let's go back to S3. And let's find our create react deploy bucket. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select upload. So it's actually a very simple process. We just upload our files into that bucket. And all of our files are going to be named the same thing. So let's go to our build folder. And then here we can just take all of these and just drag it there. So it's going to overwrite all of the previous folders and files. All right, and so upload has been successful. We can close this out now. And we can see all of the updated files, and we can see it got updated with the current time. And now let's go back to our website. And we can just go back to the root URL or not, it doesn't really matter. And let's go there and test it out. So it looks like it didn't work because we don't see those exclamation points. Let me hit refresh. Maybe we have to wait a few minutes. And it doesn't look like it worked. So why exactly did this not work? Well, let me explain to you why it didn't work. And it's ultimately because of our CDN, Cloudfront. So let's actually explain what happens with the CDN, right? We have all of these pop or edge locations scattered throughout the world. When we have our S3 bucket and we had the original source code, all of those files got copied over to these edge locations. So when we then made those code changes and then uploaded to our server, right, it doesn't upload those files to the edge locations as well. So the edge locations have a stale copy of our final deployed application. And all of the new files that we pushed up to our web server or to our S3 bucket have not made it towards our Cloudfront distribution. So how exactly do we get those pushed out? Well, it's pretty simple. We go back to our S3 console. Actually, we don't want to go to S3, we want to go to Cloudfront. And we want to select our distribution, and we have to invalidate the files that we have there. So we can select create invalidation. And then here you could specify the files that you want to invalidate. So we're just going to invalidate all files, but keep in mind, like if you only changed a couple of files, you can just specify the path to those files or the directories that you wanted to invalidate. So like let's say you made changes to some images, you can invalidate just that folder. However, we're going to invalidate everything. So I'm going to do /* that's going to invalidate everything. We'll hit invalidate. And then we're going to have to wait some time. So it's going to invalidate that. And then once it invalidates everything in our edge distribution network, it's going to then pull the new code or the new static files that we deployed to our S3 bucket. All right. And now it says it's completed. So let's go to our application. And I'm going to hit refresh and let's see what happens. Look at that, right? So when I hit refresh, what happens is it now pulls the latest files from our S3 bucket. And so our edge network, all of the edge locations pull in the new files that we uploaded to our S3 bucket. And now our application's up to date in Cloudfront as well. All right, guys, so we walked through how we can deploy changes to our application. And I know what you're thinking, right? This whole process of making changes to our application is very slow. To actually get those changes pushed out, we have to copy our code to the S3 bucket. We then have to validate Cloudfront, right? 2 steps, but it's kind of a long process. And so I wanted to show you guys how we can kind of speed things up and kind of do this in a little bit more of a automated fashion. I wouldn't say automated, but instead of having to do it through the GUI, we can also use AWS's CLI. So AWS, or really any cloud provider, has a CLI where we can do all the things that we do through the GUI, also through the CLI. So instead of having to copy over files manually and then going through the Cloudfront section and then selecting the invalidate, we can all do that with just a couple of commands on the CLI. Now, I'm not going to walk you through how to set up the AWS CLI or even go over the basics of the AWS CLI. You guys can read up on it. I actually have a full video on that as well. So if you guys want to learn about the AWS CLI and everything it has to offer, I'll walk you through it step by step. I think it's like a 2-hour video. Like it's a complete course, really. I'll put a link in the description for that video. But I'm going to quickly show you the commands that we can use to kind of automate these 2 steps that we need to push out changes. So let's go to the documentation real quick. So here, if you go to the AWS CLI section, this page right here, I'm under the quick start page, but just go to the AWS CLI and you can see how to install it. So there's an installation section right here. And then configuring it is really just a couple commands. And then after that, you guys should be good to go to follow along with everything I'm doing. So like I said, the CLI just allows us to do everything that we did through the GUI through the CLI. So just to kind of reiterate the things that we have to do when we push out changes is, first of all, we have to go to S3. And then within S3, we have to copy our new files into this bucket. And then after we copy it into the bucket, we have to go to Cloudfront. And then within the Cloudfront, we have to go to our specific distribution. And then we have to run an invalidation. So if you go to the documentation for the AWS CLI, there's a section for S3, and there's this command called sync. And what this command does is it allows you to sync a folder on your local machine to a S3 bucket. So what we're going to do is we're going to run this sync command so that we sync whatever's in our build folder and sync it to our S3 bucket. So instead of us having to drag those files from our file explorer into the GUI, we can just run the sync command. It's going to copy everything in our build folder into our S3 bucket. So let me show you guys how to do that. So any AWS command always starts with AWS. Then you use the specific services you're using, S3, and then we're going to use the sync command. And there's one flag that I want to pass in, which is -- delete. So this is going to delete any files that's in my bucket that isn't within my local build folder. Technically, we don't need that, but certain circumstances, like if you've made some changes to the application and you remove files, you don't want those sitting in the S3 bucket. So I always like to use the -- delete flag. And then what we do is we pass in the name of the folder that we want synced. So we want to copy whatever is in our build folder. And actually, before we do that, I'm going to make a quick change. So let's change our application. I'm going to remove those 4 exclamation marks. I'm going to save my application. So now let's do the sync. So I'm going to do AWS S3 sync -- delete. Then what I want to do is copy the build folder. And I just realized before we can do that, let's actually run an npm run build so that we can create those new files. Okay, so that's done. Now we can finally run our AWS command. So we'll do AWS S3 sync -- delete. And then we want to sync our build folder to, and we just do S3 : / and then the name of our bucket. So what's the name of our bucket? Well, let's go back real quick. Let's go to S3. And we just copy create react deploy. And that's all we have to do. So I just hit enter. And look at that. It's uploading all of our files that are in our build directory into our S3 bucket. So obviously running that command is a lot easier than navigating to the AWS page, logging in, and then having to manually drop those files within the S3 section. Okay, so we've done the first step of the whole deployment process, which is copying the files. The next thing that we have to do is invalidate our CDN. So if you take a look at the documentation for that, right here, there's a create invalidation, and there's an example on how to actually run this. So here, the example, you do AWS Cloudfront create invalidation. You pass the distribution ID, and then you have to specify the path. So here, we're going to do a /* to invalidate everything. But you can also pass in specific paths as well. So let's run that now. So we'll do AWS Cloudfront create -invalidation. And then we want to do -- distribution -ID. And what's our distribution ID? Well, we have to go back to our GUI. Let's get that. And it's this ID right here. And then we want to do dash dash paths. And then in quotations, we'll do /* to invalidate everything. So let's test that out. All right. And so it created invalidation. You can see the output right here. And if you look at the GUI, just to verify that it worked, and you go under invalidations, you'll see that there's an invalidation in progress. So once that's done, we'll give it a minute. We'll then go to our React app and let's make sure that the exclamation points got removed. So it's completed. Let's then go here. Let's refresh. And look at that. The exclamations got removed. So you can use the AWS CLI to kind of speed up things. And you don't just have to run that on your local machine. If you have a CI/CD pipeline or some kind of, Git, if you're running like GitHub Actions or some kind of runner, you can have that machine that handles the whole CI/CD process to actually run those specific commands. So you can have it pull in your AWS credentials and then run those two commands. Or what we can do on top of that is we can actually go back to our code and set up a script within our package.json file to do that to do all of that with just one command. So let me show you guys how we can do that. So let's go to our package.json, and I'm going to create a new script, and I'll call this deploy. So what this is going to do is it's going to run those same exact two commands, the S3 sync as well as the invalidation commands using when we do npm run deploy. And so all I have to do is I'm just going to copy this exact line right here. And then we're just going to paste it in. So that's going to handle the first step, which is copying the new files. And then we'll do and then we'll run the second command, which is the invalidation. So I'll copy this command and paste it in here. And you'll notice that it's throwing an error, and that's because we have quotations in the path. And then there's also the outside quotations for our JSON. So this creates a little bit of issues. So to escape these quotations, the inner quotations, you do backslash. I think that's a backslash, or is that for? No, that's backslash. And then backslash before this quotation as well. And so now if we do an npm run deploy, it's going to run both of those commands for us. And if we wanted to even take it another step forward, what we can also do is we'll call this build-deploy. And what's nice about these package.json scripts is that we can actually call other scripts as well. So I can do npm run build. So this is going to build our code. And then we can do an and then we can do an npm run deploy. So what's going to happen is we're going to build our code, and then we're going to run our deploy script as well, which is going to run through all three of these things. So let's save that. And I'm going to make some more changes to our code real quick. So right now we have no exclamation points. So I'm just going to run final. I'm just going to say Coinstar final example. So if we see this text, that means everything worked. And now I'm going to do save. Make sure to save it, and we'll do an npm run. Build-deploy. So it's going to build all of our code again. All right, so it finished building our code, and now it's running the AWS S3 sync. And you can see the uploading. And then after that's done, you can see the Cloudfront invalidation as well. And so going back to our GUI, we can see that another invalidation is progress. So once that's done, we'll go back to our React app and let's verify that the changes took effect. All right, so it's done. Let's hit refresh. And look at that. We've pushed out those changes. So now we've kind of automated the whole deployment process. We almost set up our own very simple CI/CD pipeline. It's not really a CI/CD pipeline, but it is a little bit of a CD pipeline, I guess. There is no continuous integration. It's, as soon as we make those changes, we just deploy it. So, anyways, that's all I wanted to show you guys in this video. Hopefully you found this helpful. Hopefully you have a little bit better understanding of how we can deploy React apps, and a little bit of better understanding of how AWS works, as well as how the CLI works, and how we can kind of integrate all of those things into our development workflow to actually get our application set up and deployed onto AWS.